Thank you for checking out the Long Run Podcast. Let's be honest, life is hard, and it can sometimes be just as confusing as it is exciting. Whether you're gearing up for your first job, preparing for a new semester of college, searching for a spouse, or you're just working to pay off your debt. As you jump life's hurdles, you can easily begin to lose sight of what race you're even running. Our heart behind this podcast is to help you make your life count in the long run of eternity by discussing how to passionately love Jesus and follow Him daily. With that being said, here's the next episode of the Long Run Podcast.
I got all the cash I need.
You know what they say, cash is king.
Cash is the Tiger King.
No. Cash is king, and the paid-off home mortgage has taken the place of the BMW as the status symbol of choice. Who's that? Who's that person?
Dave Ramsey.
Dave Ramsey. If you have not taken personal finance in high school, they don't teach that in college, but did you take personal finance in high school?
Economics, yeah. Mm-hmm.
Did that teach you how to run your money?
Yeah, they taught pretty good principles. I remember.
I just didn't pay attention.
Yeah.
I was too worried about the girls in my class. I thought I was a weirdo.
Do you know what the percentage of home ownership is in a country?
Like paid off homes?
Right. I want to say it's like less than 10%.
That's crazy.
It may be lower than that. So I have a friend that I know bought a house outright. And so he owns his home. I can't imagine owning a home.
It's too much responsibility.
Well, I mean, it's just crazy what you would do with that mortgage every month.
Mm-hmm.
But, I mean, I'm sure Dave Ramsey talks about this. If you don't spend the money on that, you're going to most likely blow it on something.
Absolutely.
So that's the counter of it is if you don't have notes, you better be, bills, you better be disciplined with what you do with that extra cash.
Well, if you podcast listeners have problems with money, that's our shameless plug to listen to Dave Ramsey.
I'm sure. Is Dave going to plug our show?
I think he might. I'm waiting. I'm pending that deal and that notice there. He's up the road in Nashville, but
I hope he doesn't listen to any of my sermons on money because I just ripped straight from his website. So like that is not original at all.
I just take straight from the blog post or whatever. I actually just quote his intro every time. We're not talking about money today. What are we talking about?
So today we're continuing our conversation. Does my voice sound weird to you?
I mean, it sounds normal, which is normally weird.
All right. So we're continuing our conversation over discipleship.
Discipleship. What's a disciple again, Cliff? Tell me.
Is anyone who places their trust in Jesus Christ as their Lord and Savior.
Absolutely. I think that's a good answer. That's a good pastor answer.
Yeah, thank you.
You're so welcome.
All right. Well, that is my day job.
So last week, what was the episode called last week? It was called Making Disciples.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, we talked big, broad overview about making disciples. Some of the things we talked about is, Jesus gave the command to go and make disciples of all nations, go make followers of Him. Under the command to make disciples, there's two things we do from that. Make someone a disciple initially by evangelizing them, sharing Jesus with them, sharing the gospel with them. And then two, the other part of that boat is discipleship, which is helping someone follow Christ, helping others follow Jesus. And so we're really going to park it in the discipleship camp for this episode and really talk about how do you disciple somebody? Because I think it's a very churchy word that's thrown around, but we really don't know how to do it.
Yeah, I was in a pastor's conference this morning, and they were talking about having a discipleship conference in February. And so in church life and Christian life, you have this vernacular, this lingo of that comes and goes, these buzzwords, if you will, and so I feel like right now the word discipleship is that word. You've had words like community, you've had all kinds of different words.
Intentionality.
Yeah. When in the late 90s, you constantly heard, postmodern culture, and it's like, what does that even mean, And so, discipleship is a key word. I believe with all of my heart that discipleship is a calling and we're supposed to be obedient. But I also sometimes am concerned that we put the cart before the horse. And what I mean by that is we don't focus enough on evangelism.
Right. And you mentioned that last episode. Yeah.
Mm-hmm. And so you can't have discipleship if you don't have evangelism, and this conversation's not about evangelism, but we've got to have that understanding that if you're not evangelizing, you're not going to be able to disciple.
Right.
And
you're really not making disciples.
Right. Yeah, right. An active disciple, a true follower of Christ, is going to evangelize and won't be able to help it. And so I don't want us to neglect or overlook the important role that evangelism takes in discipleship.
Mm-hmm. And there's not a lot of people I know that really do that, but it's a lot of what they talk about is only discipleship and a lot only what they teach. And so we just got to make sure that we're doing it justice when we speak about the command to make disciples, that we understand both parts, both paddles in the boat of evangelism and discipleship. That's an illustration I've heard before. If you don't have the evangelism paddle, or you don't even have the discipleship paddle, and you only have one paddle, well, you're kind of just going to go in circles there for a little bit.
Yeah, that's good.
Yeah, it's something to keep in mind. So that was kind of a quick recap of what we talked about last episode to really summarize the command of making disciples. Now that we understand the evangelism command, or that we understand evangelism as a part of the command to make disciples, now we're really going to look into discipleship, the process of helping others follow Jesus. And really, how do we do that? Because like you mentioned before, it's a buzzword we throw around. Oh, who are you discipling right now? Well, I'm in a discipleship relationship. Or, well, Cliff is my discipler. And everybody kind of has their different parameters of how they go about and practice discipleship. But we're really kind of give the different, and we talked about this last episode, we're going to kind of give and identify these different relationships that happen, so we understand the whole house and each room, and kind of just give the practical tips of this is how you disciple somebody.
Yeah, and so before we start building the house, I just want to point out that your personal growth is your personal responsibility, right, and nobody else's. Okay, and so if you truly want to grow in the Lord, and we had a little bit of feedback on this on our Facebook post last week. A friend of ours said, I'm praying for somebody to lead me to that relationship, and so, but until then, until you find somebody, the Lord brings somebody, whatever, you are responsible for growing, to get off milk and to get on meat and to chew the hard truths yourself. And in this day and age of modern technology, right now, media, YouTube, all these Bible studies that are out there, you do not lack for information.
Right.
You could lack for wisdom, because information and knowledge does not equate wisdom, and I think that wisdom is found through a lot of times a discipleship relationship, as is accountability. But your growth as a Christian is your responsibility. I said it to our church yesterday. If you've been a part of a church, or you have friends who say, I'm leaving because I'm not getting fed here, well, the majority of your feeding is personal. Right? If you're depending upon the pastor to feed you that big meal each week, and that's what you're trying to ride on throughout the whole week, that's not right. You have got to take control of your own spiritual growth, your own nurturing. That falls upon you. Everybody's not going to have the relationship that you and I have. Everybody's not going to have that person that they've grown up with for 10, 15, 20 years, and they feel comfortable pouring everything out there. And it doesn't always happen naturally like that. And so as we look at the nuts and bolts, I would say that the best discipleship relationships I've ever seen in my life, being the disciple and being the discipler, they have happened naturally in the context of church.
Right. The local body.
The local body. When I got saved as a 14-year-old, I couldn't get enough of our youth ministry in our church. I'm talking about Sunday morning, Sunday night, Wednesday. I couldn't get enough of it, and I wanted to be there. And my poor youth minister, Rusty, was accused of playing favorites, because I was always around, and Rusty was like, man, I don't play favorites. He just is up here all the time. Like, I can't get rid of the dude, and
what a nerd.
Right.
What a geek.
And honestly, that's how I got my call to youth ministry. Is I was a Christian for a year, and it was summertime, and I made fun of Rusty for youth ministers not working, and he made me feel bad, but I was right. Now that I've been on this side of youth ministry, I was right. It's not work. But he ended up picking me up every day that summer. You've heard the story. And I did just crap jobs, bulletin boards, putting pictures on stuff, painting the same wall 5 times that summer, all kinds of paperwork. And after the summer, and I went to youth camp, I went to World Changers mission trip, and I did all kinds of youth events. And it was after that 2 months, I went to my youth minister and I said, there's nothing else I'd rather do than this. Yeah. And during that summer, I grew closer to Rusty than I probably did any other adult in my life, outside of maybe my coaches. And so that kind of put us on that path of mentoring / discipleship. But we didn't sit down and have a book study. We never once sat down and read the Bible together. He never once did what we're doing here and or anything like that. Everything that happened that first summer that was the catalyst for our relationship growing to what it is even still today, it all started because I was just living in a shadow.
Right.
I was just watching. I remember going and buying shoes with him at Sports Academy, I think is what it was called, over there on Germantown Parkway. And we went in the middle of the day, and I'm thinking, man, he's working and he's buying shoes in the middle of the day.
This is awesome.
And but I just remember him talking to the cashier, and he was just so kind. He was so gentle. He was funny, and that was all new to me. And I just learned how he would treat the cashiers at Sam's and at all these other stores, and I was just like, man, so that's how a Christian's supposed to do it, because I didn't have that in my life. And so our discipleship relationship didn't start with, all right, Cliff, you're going to read Matthew 1 through 28, and we're going to talk about it, once each week.
Right.
That's not how it started.
No curriculum in place.
No, nothing like that. There was no journaling.
Very organic.
Honestly, yeah. If that's how the relationship would have started, this because we're going through some discipleship stuff together, and I'm only a month behind. And so, although I think I'm in front of you now, I read today, and I don't think you did.
No, I didn't.
And
you checked in, didn't you?
And so, but if you said, okay, read this, and we're going to meet, and I'm going to pour into you, we probably wouldn't have gotten very far.
Yeah.
And so sometimes we think, all right, a discipleship relationship should look a certain way. We need to go through a book of the Bible, or we need to read a book together, John Piper, Chandler, whatever. We need to read a book together. Don't waste your life. Sometimes it just doesn't happen that way.
Sometimes it's more beneficial if we play Xbox and I see how you act when I beat you in 2K. You know what I mean? Like
that never happened.
Right, because I beat you in Call of Duty.
And so, so that's how my discipleship relationship started with Rusty. And me telling you that, I bet that was very similar to what, as you just alluded to, our relationship. You guys were little pitiful 7th graders.
Yep, that's right. And now we're pitiful young adults.
And we all still act like 7th graders.
Right.
And I remember I'd been the youth minister here for about 2 years. Your brother was the one I was closest to, and he graduated. And this was going through my mind, and I'm just being very transparent. I said, okay, I was close to Walt and this class. He's graduating. I could either start to look elsewhere, because not a lot was happening at our church at that time. I could either look elsewhere, put my resume out, or I can reinvest and essentially, in a way, start over. And that's what I did. I knew of you because I'd be over here eating with Walt, and we already had that relationship. And so I got you, and I remember, I think we were up here playing. I said, is there anybody else that we could go and pick up? And you told me about Zach.
And look at Zach. He ain't doing nothing.
He ain't doing nothing. He doesn't have any friends. And so we picked up Zach. And all we did for like 5 years, we played.
Don't say it.
We'd come here, we'd play Xbox, we went out to eat a lot, we hung out, and that relationship just organically grew together,
right,
to where even today,
because we saw the ins and outs of youth ministry, everything you did, and it wasn't, this is what you guys need to do, but it was the day-to-day life of seeing how you communicated with people, how you led your family, how you dealt with friendships and every other thing that would come up in daily life. And that's the pattern, and what we saw was the example. And so it was literally, I'm not trying to toot your horn because I'm not, but it was
Toot it, baby.
But it was a
wait a second.
Easy. But it was a very, as Paul would say, follow me or imitate me as I imitate Christ.
Right. Do as I do.
Yeah.
Yeah. And so I wish that's the method. I believe that's honestly the method that God ordained when you have the Shema in Deuteronomy 6. He says, write these things on your heart, tie them around your head, put them on the door frame of your post, and speak of them when you're walking in the day and in the night. And that was originally for mom and dad to do that for his children. And unfortunately, we have a society, a culture, and now a world where children are growing up and those parents aren't doing that because they're not Christians. And so it's not the role or the responsibility for a youth minister, children's minister, or pastor, or anybody to come alongside and take that responsibility from parents. But I believe that those pastors, youth ministers, etc., can come in and be that stopgap, and help fill that void. It's never our job to take that, and I didn't need to take that for you.
Right.
And so, excuse me. And anyways, that's how it worked. If you're an adult listening to this, you're thinking, well, great. I'm an adult, and that naturally happened for me. So, what am I supposed to do? How am I supposed to find that? I don't have the next 10 years or 5 years to do that. Also, I'm busy. I work 40 hours. I have a family.
Right.
It's hard for me to devote that time. So what can I do?
And that's kind of what we're going to talk about here right now. And you mentioned our relationship and how it was very organic. I would say almost informal. There were no formal meetings and stuff like that. No structure. Well, you know what I mean? No structure, no curriculum in place for a discipleship relationship. And so let's talk about that and how that differs for some other relationships that take place. So we would call that more of an organic relationship. And what would you call the opposing view? Not that it's an opposing view like it's wrong, but when there's limited time, you know what I mean? If you've got a father who works, somebody told me this, who works 50 hours, he's got a father, he's got a full-time job. And he needs time where he needs this. He just became a believer, and he needs to be discipled.
Yeah, and he maybe doesn't have time to
play Xbox,
or just chit chat. And so I know of a local group that meets, I think, every Saturday morning. My pastor, your pastor Chuck, he would meet on Saturday mornings, 8:00 in the church conference room, and he would have men, and he would intentionally pour into them. And so when you're trying to, you have a busy schedule and you want that relationship, then sometimes you have to be extremely formal, and you have to say, hey, we're going to meet at this time every week, and here's the understanding. I'm going to come in and I have already read this amount, and we're going to cover it. Whether it's scripture, it's other books, Rick Warren, Pike, whomever, and you pick that and you say, okay, we're going to meet, and that discipleship model. That meeting could be real simple. You look inward. What's been going on in your heart lately, right? You look, what are you struggling with? Things like that. You look outward. What's been going on at your workplace? What's been going on with your family? Is there somebody we've been praying for? How's that going? You look inward. You look outward, and then you look upward. Right, and that upward is when you dive into the Word, you spend time in prayer, you lift up the requests that maybe you've talked about, and that's typically been the model that I've adopted when I have that formal time. Again, that's like the roadmap. Okay, let's inward, outward, and upward.
Right, and discipleship is not limited to a relationship where it would be. How old are you? 35?
36.
Oh wow, you're getting old.
I'm getting there.
Somebody who's 36, I'm 22, whatever that was age-wise when I was in youth ministry. It doesn't have to be that almost mentor relationship, because discipleship can even take place with people that are the same age, and it's, as Proverbs says, iron sharpens iron.
Right.
You know what I mean? We don't have to put a framework around it and try to keep it in this box and say, this is the only way you do it, because, I mean, Jesus set an example, but the only thing that he said is go make disciples of all nations, baptizing them in the name of the Father and Son and the Holy Spirit, teaching them to obey everything I've commanded you. So any way that we can effectively help others walk down the road of being more Christ-like and obeying Christ and fostering a more intimate relationship with him, whatever works. Now, as we arch down the funnel from, the pulpit to, we talked about this, the funnel, it's wide at the top, pulpit, Sunday morning preaching, that's an aspect of discipleship in and of itself, wouldn't you say? Mm-hmm. And then moving down to life groups where you have a classroom of 30 people,
right.
There's a little bit more taking place there, a little bit more being gathered, a little bit more accountability. But honestly, what we see being the most effective, but not the only way, are close relationships,
right.
friendships that take place because, that's how Jesus lived it. Now, I think it would be wrong for us to say, that's the only way true discipleship happens, because not everybody gets that. And you said that earlier. I've known people I've done ministry with, and they said, I never had that. And what are they doing? They're going and making disciples, even though they never had that one-on-one,
right.
one-on-two relationship. So as we kind of understand the age possibilities here, like I said, there can be a mentor-type relationship. Somebody's older, somebody's younger. You're on the same level. So that can all take place within these discipleship relationships. So keep that in mind. Now let's move toward the big question here. How do we do it? But before we do that, before we answer how do we make disciples, which it's not as hard as it sounds, who do we need to disciple? Well, first, I would say you cannot disciple somebody who's not a Christian. Wouldn't you say so?
Yeah, I think that's like pre-discipleship work, and I heard that a missionary say, it's pre-discipleship. I'm going to trust the Lord that he's going to bring him to the Lord. And heard a missionary, who's in a predominantly Muslim country, and he's doing language classes. He's trying to learn Aramaic. And so these coaches are coming, and they're all Muslim, but he's using the New Testament for the coaches to use. He said, I need to learn this book in Aramaic. And so he's like, hey, that's pre-discipleship. They're getting to know the word, and the Lord's going to bring them to himself, and then I'll be able to do the real discipleship. So, that's it.
and moving down the line, they have to be Christian, because you can't help grow someone in Christ, if they're not a believer. So you made a good point there. And have you heard of that? I'm sure you've heard the acronym called FAT. You're familiar
Faithful, available, teachable.
Yeah. You were just like looking at me like
I was making sure we're talking about the same thing.
All right, so
fat bottom girls, you make this rockin' world go round.
Okay, and diverging back to the topic. Let's save the.
All of our older people are thinking, I love that song.
If you're gonna sing, please keep it to hymns. Save us a little bit.
That's kind of a worship song.
Please save us a little bit, Cliff.
All right, sorry.
So, FAT. What's the acronym stand for? What'd you say?
Faithful, available, teachable.
Okay, if you want to save some time and I guess frustration, if you're volunteering in the youth ministry and you're in college or you're a young adult or even a parent, whatever, and you're looking for a kid possibly to disciple or spend some time with, help foster a friendship and a relationship to kind of push them to the Lord. Maybe they don't have that in their life, whatever. And you can be around kids that are not faithful, available, and teachable because they're kids. They got to grow up. I don't know, probably a lot of people in the youth that are faithful, are available. They're kind of just all over the place. But say, I guess, if you move to a more serious relationship with somebody and you start spending time with them and you're learning more about them and they're really not showing up when they're supposed to, or they're just not doing their reading, and you really can't have a conversation when you have to meet and stuff like this in these more formal discipleship relationships. So, they're not faithful to read, they're not ever available, and they're not really teachable in a sense. You might possibly be wasting your time there. And you want to prayerfully consider who you want to spend your time around, because you want to be a good steward of your time and who you're teaching and things like that. But it's just something to remember.
Yeah, so it's an investment. When you are discipling somebody, you are investing not only your time, but your emotional and spiritual capacity or capital into those people. And all of us can only be spread so thin. And so if you see that investment's not paying off because they're not taking it seriously, then at some point you have to make that hard decision. Say, hey, you know what? This just isn't working out.
Right.
We're going to end this type of relationship. And yeah, you have to do that.
Right. Because it's a spiritual decision, but it's a business decision. Like, this is common sense. Like, look, you're not holding your end of the deal. Like, I'm trying to spend my time to help you, and I could be spending it at someone else. So that's a good point. If you're discipling somebody in like a one-on-one or like a group relationship, it's probably best to keep it gender specific. Like,
absolutely. Yeah. It's prayer and, speaking about spiritual matters, well, especially prayer can be a very intimate time. I tell high school couples who are dating and college couples who are dating, it's like, be careful when you're alone and praying together. I know it feels very spiritual, but it can be very intimate.
Yeah.
And this is silly, but women who love the Lord are really attracted, and I'll say it, turned on by men who love the Lord and are doing what they're supposed to be doing. I know that sounds weird, but like that is a serious you think, and I'm not bullcrapping you. I'm serious. I have heard women say it, that I am attracted to a man who loves the Lord. And just as I think men are attracted to a woman who has self-respect and who loves the Lord. And I do think that if somebody's heart is really connected to the Lord, that is an attractant. That is something that is very serious. And so, it's and I want to talk about the relationship as well of discipleship. I knew my youth minister for about 4 years. It was not until my last semester of my senior year of high school. All right, so we knew each other for about 4 years at that time, where he gave me a book called Improving Your Serve, and he said, if you're down with this, if you agree with me, that we will meet every Wednesday at 4 o'clock for 1 hour, and we're going to discuss a chapter of this book, we'll talk, we'll pray together, and that's it. And I had to enter an agreement. There was no signing of the covenant or anything like that, or any promise. He just said, will you commit to me to meet every Wednesday at 4 o'clock? And if you can't, you give me more than an hour's notice. And so it was a step up in responsibility for me. But I remember I knew this dude, and I remember feeling like, man, I get to be with him for an hour, like just me and him. We had a big youth group. And so we did. And so it was 4 years into our serious relationship, until we sat down and had a very structured time together. And then it was a 15-week time. It was a 15-chapter book. And about 10 weeks into it, he began to tell me, hey, at the end of this, we're ending. We're not continuing this forever. But at the end, you have to commit that you're going to do this to one or two other students. And at that time, I took two, I think, middle schoolers, and I met with them all summer long. And both of them, they've turned out pretty good. So
as far as you know.
And I follow my Facebook, and one, they both are really good guys. But he made me commit, after this is over, you're going to go and do this. And so it's that disciples make disciples, and he put that on me.
So those are the things to keep in mind as you're looking for who to disciple. If you don't have anybody to disciple right now, and you're like, well, all those things are great. Yeah, they got to be a Christian, faithful, available, teachable, and same gender, all those things. But there's nobody around here. Well, pray that the Lord will send you somebody, show you somebody, and go look. You know what I mean? Like, and somebody's going to turn up, because everybody needs a little bit of help. So with that in mind of who to disciple, now let's move to almost the easiest part, is how to disciple somebody. And we've gone over the relationships, we've gone over who to disciple, and I'm actually finishing up a short little book right now. It's called Discipling. It's by 9 Marks Ministry. I guess they have 9 books about healthy church? Building healthy churches, and they've got 9 different books from like discipleship to biblical theology, evangelism, church leadership, all sorts of little things. But really good book. And so I'm going to read just from the short little passage here, because I read it earlier and I thought it was a good section for how to disciple somebody. And it says right here, for starters, your discipling should help people understand more. Through discipling, you want people to know why Christians pray, why we share the gospel, why we join a church, why knowledge of God's sovereignty impacts how we live, and more. Discipling is not merely about accountability and behavior modification. Jesus tells us to make disciples by teaching people to obey, but they cannot obey what they haven't been taught. We first have to teach. So our goal is to help people understand more, cover the basics, cover the foundations. If they don't understand why we baptize or who Jesus is or the Trinity, the foundations of the Christian faith, what Jesus did on the cross, those are big things. Mm-hmm. Those have to be addressed. But if those are understood, it's almost the why behind things. And how do I live out my faith as a Christian? You know what I mean?
Yeah, and I'd agree with that. If I were to write a book, I think I would say the most important thing of discipleship is not to teach somebody to know something, but to deeply fall in love with Jesus Christ.
Mm-hmm. And the Word of God has to be central there. Like it says in Philippians 2:16, Paul wrote, hold fast to the Word of life.
Yeah. I do believe that too much of Christianity is about behavior modification and things of that nature, and you get so caught up in trying to change and stop sinning, mm-hmm. things like that. And Bob Goff, has a quote, and he says, being a Christian isn't about becoming a better version of ourselves, but it's about becoming more made into the likeness of Jesus Christ.
Right.
And yes, knowledge is so important, and you need those things, especially if you're going to, those are the meat things that we chew on.
It fuels your trust with Jesus. But if
mm-hmm.
it ends there and no intimacy and love takes place, then why would you want to change in the first place?
Yeah. But so, I would say it always goes back to this good teaching question and a question I ask when I'm preaching, I'm writing my sermon. What's the so what here?
Mm-hmm.
So what? That Ruth married Boaz. Okay, who cares? How does this point to Christ? How does this help somebody in their everyday relationship with the Lord? And so you got to ask yourself, what's the so what of this knowledge? What's the so what of this information? Because just because you know big words and you know big terms, man, that sure as heck doesn't mean that you're intimate follower of Jesus,
right?
And I am kind of worried that some of our Christian leaders, they're leaning too much on intellect, and even when I say that, it sounds like I'm against intellectualism and being smart.
Sounds like you hate the Bible,
and it's not. But I want to know the Bible because I know the God who wrote it, because I know who it's pointing to. I don't want to know the Bible just so I can quote it, but I want to know the Bible because it guides me to my Maker, and it's all about a relationship. It's not about rules. It's not about laws. It's about a relationship, a true relationship with Jesus. And to me, that's what the best disciple does, is points the disciplers, or those who are being discipled, points them to Jesus and says, hey, keep your eyes on him because he is what this is all about.
Right. And just to add to that point before we kind of wrap it up here, 1 Corinthians 8:1 says, now about food sacrificed to idols, we know that all possesses knowledge. Knowledge puffs up, but love builds up. The man who thinks he knows something does not yet know as he ought to know, but the man who loves God is known by God. And that's not to diminish knowledge at all, but it's to create a balance and wisdom and the wise use of knowledge. You have all this, what do I use it for? Because just because you have it doesn't mean you need to say it all the time.
Yeah.
But that can apply to so many different scenarios. I'm sure you thought we needed to discuss that because it is important, and that transfers directly into your discipleship relationships and what the person you're discipling soaks up too. And I don't want to say what you teach is more important than teaching like how to live. We're not trying to pick one or the other, but the balance between the two and make sure they're used in the proper way, I guess, is the best way I can honestly say it. And so as we kind of wrap up here with how to disciple somebody, we have to understand who you disciple determines how you disciple. And we talked about that with the scenario of a guy who works 50 hours a week and has a family. His responsibilities, his schedule, all those things play into who you're discipling. If they go to another church, it's probably better if, like you said, if you disciple in your own body, in your own local church. And so who you disciple dictates how you disciple them. So keep that in mind. And and this is when I say discipling somebody, that this is the easiest to understand once you kind of like figure it out. Because it's really it's just relationship.
Mm-hmm.
It's getting a friendship with somebody and helping them push them to Christ.
Right.
And you don't have to sit here and have Bible studies and have a time where you meet. Those things are appropriate in certain aspects, but if you have the time, let it be organic, let it be a friendship, and you're just constantly pointing somebody to Christ. If you have a new relationship with somebody, maybe a high schooler that you've kind of taken under your wing, just keep asking them questions. Get to know them, create a relationship with them,
Right.
and as you move from this natural relationship, and trust and transparency takes place because you're more friends now, you can ask these why questions as far as it relates to spiritual matters, because that's been some of the most impactful things that I've had in my life, is when somebody who, for me, grew up in the church, got saved, and had to learn what it meant to follow Jesus. He was my Savior, but I had to understand Lordship and what it meant for him to be my Lord. The best thing for me was when somebody challenged and questioned, not my faith, but like, Weston, how's your relationship with Christ? And I'm like, why is he asking me that? It's like, what does he mean by like, oh, somebody like, and I'm like, people take this seriously? And it's like, so that was some of the most encouraging things and challenging things for me.
That's good. I would, just one thought that I had kind of hanging out there, some discipleship relationships, sign covenants, and accountability statements, things of that nature. I've never been a fan of that. If we're going to enter into this sacred relationship where you're asking me to pour into you, then I'm just taking you at your word that you're going to take it serious.
Yeah.
And I'm not about to pull out some piece of paper and say, hey, you signed this.
Right.
You gave me your word. I'm not going to do that.
Right. And that may sound foreign to some people. Well, somebody's probably never heard of that before. I think I've only heard of that one time, and I was like, I think I'll pass.
Yeah, and it's always a little leery, for me as well. But again, if you trust me to be your discipler, and to pour into you, then you're going to trust me to hold you accountable and to call out the things that I see in your life that's not up to snuff. And I don't need a contract to do that.
Right.
You gave me the permission to do that when you asked me to invest in you.
Right. And, as you read your Bible throughout the week and after you listen to this podcast, pay attention in the New Testament and the Gospels of how Jesus, discipled his disciples. Just pay attention to what he did. And you'll be able to see a lot of cool things that took place and maybe things you can apply in your own life.
So Weston and I are going through this intensive discipleship program, and we're reading 3 chapters every day.
Hence the word intensive.
And
of the Bible. We're reading 3 chapters of the Bible
a day. And we started in Luke, and I told Weston I had no idea that the chapters of Luke are so stinking long, because I'll read and I'll also listen, and I just preached through Ruth 4 chapters, 85 verses in the entire book, of Ruth. And Luke chapter 1, 80 verses. 80 verses. Like it took me longer to read Luke chapter 1 because it doesn't necessarily read smooth like a story like Ruth does. And so, it took me longer to read 1 chapter of Luke. And then I kept listening, 3 chapters.
Yeah.
60 verses. 50 verses, 47 verses. I'm like, good night, Luke. So I learned, I knew Luke was a doctor and he's very detailed and thorough. But man, Luke. So
he packs it in there, doesn't he?
He does. And so here's the little trivia. I talked about this. Who wrote the most? And now they're going to know because of the context.
Right. I thought it was. Go ahead. Sorry.
Who wrote the most words in the New Testament?
Well, initially I would say Paul. Because I said that in a family group study and I got corrected with.
It seems like it's Paul.
Right.
He has I can't remember how many letters, but he has a majority of.
He's got more books.
Yeah. It's Luke. Between the book of Luke and Acts.
He's just cheating though.
Those are 2 long books. Both of them are very long, and the chapters are long. And Luke wrote more words in the New Testament than anybody else.
It's like when you're trying to find a movie to go to one night back when we could go to movies, but you're looking, you're like, oh, we could go see that. We could go see that. How long is that? 3 hours? Golly, I don't know. If
I'm a loser, but not that big a loser.
Oh gosh. Well, Cliff, that's about all I got, which wasn't much, but you got anything else to wrap up? Tell the viewers what to do. Listeners and viewers.
Oh yeah. So if
they know the gist.
Yeah, so apparently you could listen to us on a bunch of different things. Like there's this thing called iTunes.
Apple Podcast.
Apple Podcast.
And Spotify.
Yeah, apparently I have a premium Spotify, and I don't even know how to use it. My daughter rolls her eyes at me.
I do, too, because it's better than Apple Music.
It is?
Absolutely. And if you disagree with that, we'll take it up.
You want to know what I listen to? You're gonna make fun of me. Pandora.
Oh, my gosh. You're like my mother.
I don't even...
I'm like, Mom, you listen to more ads right now than you do music.
I do. And I'm paying every month for premium Spotify, and I don't even listen to it. All right, so you can pull that up. But if you follow us on Facebook every Wednesday at about 9 o'clock, I post our link.
Oh, wow.
But
they have to be friends with you on Facebook, Pastor Cliff. Don't you have one? Now, you're a head pastor. You have one of those Facebook now where I have to like the page, right? It's a fan page.
No. Yeah, that'll be like the world's smallest fan page. I get more hate mail than anything. But if you click it on Facebook, do you get to watch the video?
Well, it's on my YouTube channel. But look, I'll make it easy for you and all you listeners, because we're at 41 minutes and I know you're tired of listening. Just go to www.thelongrunpodcast.org. At the top left-hand corner, you'll see all the links from Spotify, Apple Podcast, and my YouTube channel.
I'm done.
Thanks for listening. See you next week.